Swansea City's tenure in the Championship over the last 7 years kind of depends on your perspective and how you look at it. Because from the point of view of a club that I think they got promoted to the Premier League in 2011 and spent 7 years in that division, I think there's probably a disappointment that they haven't been able to establish themselves as one of the better teams in the Championship in this period, and probably even get promoted in this time. But on the other hand, I suppose there's also an argument about where the club was going back to I think the sort of mid to early noughties, where they had a wonderful footballer in Lee Trundle, but before Kenny Jackett and then later Roberto Martinez and people like that took charge to sort of revolve the Swansea way, if you like, and bring that attractive style that saw them rise up the leagues. They were actually a third division club in what was then the fourth tier. And so it very much depends on your perspective. I think that perhaps there's a frustration with the ownership of the club, and there's a feeling that that's given way one or two structural issues and possibly the lack of investment to a bit of a malaise, because since they had a first season down in the Championship under Graham Potter in 1819, where they played some good football and just missed out, and then they did make to the top six for 2 seasons running under Steve Cooper without necessarily playing the best football. But then they've had a period, haven't they, where they've not quite had the results they wanted. They've tried some managers that have, I suppose, Russ Martin has got the closest to building a team that can challenge for the playoffs, but without quite the efficiency that they were looking for. And so Swansea have kind of had this malaise around mid-table in the Championship, and without a huge amount of ambition or drive from the top of the club. And maybe some would argue that has sort of filtered down into the playing side. But the big hope for Swansea City is the initial turnaround under Alan Sheehan, because after he took the caretaker job initially in the last third of that last season, Swansea City became one of the form teams in the league, and only promoted Burnley and Leeds took more points in that same time frame. So there is reason for optimism for Swansea. There is reason to think that Alan Sheehan has maybe pivoted a little bit from the Swansea way and given the Swans that adaptability, that little bit of pragmatism, that little bit of threat that maybe they'd been missing in previous campaigns. So what does the future hold? And was this just a honeymoon period for Alan Sheehan, or is the rookie the real deal? That's what we're going to try and find out on this Summer Deep Dive. Yes, welcome along to EFL Debate. I'm speaking to a fan of each of the 72 clubs across the EFL between mid-June and mid-July. So if you want more of that content, you can do us a massive favour by getting subscribed to us on YouTube and on Spotify. And we're also now on TikTok as well. Delighted to be joined by Luke from SwansCast on Swansea City. I'm just wondering, Luke, what's your feeling about where Swansea City are at as a club at the moment, balancing, I guess, some of the frustrations with the issues upstairs with a little bit of optimism about what Alan Sheehan can do?
I do think it was a very good overall perspective of where we are at the moment. However, I think it's important to note that the ownership issues that we have had, we did have a change of ownership last November that pretty much we're now perhaps starting to see some of the results of. I don't think necessarily we can definitively say good or bad yet, but the signs are there that things are different. And I think our summer window so far has shown perhaps that the current owners that we have are a little bit more serious about some sort of action on the ground level. Some frustrations were still there, especially in January. So obviously, bear in mind, they only took over in November. But Andy Coleman at the time was the chairman, who was chairman under the last ownership. He was part of the new ownership team, even though he was serving chairman. He brought the new owners in, but he stayed through the process. We had a really bad January window for the most part. Ultimately, in hindsight, you can look back and think it was okay because we brought in Lewis O'Brien and did really well. But the planning around it was a bit of a shambles in regards to what we saw, and they were like scrambling around on deadline day to try and replace Matt Grimes, and it was just carnage. And as a result of that carnage and the lack of action planning and whatever they were expecting didn't happen, they got rid of Coleman. they literally got rid of him. They'll say it's mutual, and that's what perhaps he wanted. But I think there was noises coming out that the new ownership were not happy with what they saw. All the fan base wasn't happy. They were like, look, new owners, more of the same. It's another January, another shambles, like same as what we've had the last couple of years. Don't think that sat well with the new ownership. And to be fair to them, I think I did say at the time, maybe we're jumping the gun. Like, how much can you change in 2 months when it comes ahead to a January window? They've probably already got all the action plans in place for that, and then the implementation of it. Like, it didn't work out the way they wanted, but they've looked at why, and as far as I'm concerned now, they addressed that issue and they've moved him on. And if you look at the summer as a direct comparison now, we've done so much of our business already, and we're only in early July, which is unheard of for us as Swansea fans. We usually used to last minute business, losing some players towards the end, and then we have to overpay to replace, and they end up being costly mistakes. So we're trying to ship on down the line. Obviously, I can't speak for any of the performance of the guys that have been brought in to know that is or isn't going to happen, but it looks very much more positive from what we've brought in so far. So since we've come down, I think this has got to be one of the summers where the feeling is the most positive. Not to say, obviously, we had those seasons under Steve Cooper where we were more competitive, and I think the expectation at that time perhaps was a bit higher. So even though we finished higher, like, we thought that's where we were. I think on the back of the 2 seasons that we've just had, now feeling what we feel like, it does feel quite good considering how much of a roller coaster it's been the last 2 years. Like, I'm not saying that we're going to be competitive and get playoffs, but it looks like they're building a good foundation and a good structure at the base. And a lot of the players that are coming in, they're not loans, they're permanent. They're given decent sized contracts in terms of resale value, and they're quite often younger development players who, they're not like players that are, Bobby Wales is one of the ones that's come in. He's probably the youngest one that is more of a project, but the other ones are still young, but they've shown enough to be competitive at this level. So if they continue that development, their value will go up. Like Franco, for example, from last season, I think is probably the best example to use. He kind of got brought out of nowhere. No one really knew about him before, from a club in Portugal. Come in, he's had a really strong season in the Championship. We really want to lose him, but he's been linked away. I'm hoping that doesn't happen. I don't think it is at the moment. But you'd imagine if he has another season like last year, we'd be lucky if we keep hold of him next summer. But that's kind of, unfortunately, that's the model I think a lot of clubs use in the Championship, and you have to kind of accept that a little bit if you want to build your club up.
You want people to want your players as well.
Yeah.
That's the paradox, isn't it?
But that's how the money comes back in. There's a lot going around, these days about the financial situation of football in general and the Championship as a league. And you've got to utilize that model very successfully to be competitive. That's the reality. So it is sad when you get a good player like that who has to move on, but they could keep the club building for a few years as a result of a decent fee if they can show that much quality. So that's the goal of all of these signings, really. There's a few that perhaps come in for more stability of the team, but then I think on the most part, the signing players to come in, do a good job, hopefully get better. And either, if it leads to promotion, maybe we don't have to rely so much on that. But otherwise, to reinvest in a club when they do move on as well. But it looks like those things that they've talked about for seasons and seasons, statistical data approach to transfers and all of this stuff that they talk about all the time. I do feel perhaps we're starting to see some of that actually come to fruition in a good way, where these signings are working out. They look a little bit better fit, and not sometimes they spend a bit on a player and you can kind of get the feeling it's a bit too much. Kukurejevic, for example, when they brought him in under Michael Duff, didn't work out, ends up on loan, and he's gone now at a significant loss. But it looks like they have stabilized with their decision making and hopefully getting in better quality, and the ones that are more risky aren't costing as much then.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right as well to not maybe pin the blame on a bad January on the new owners, because I think for new owners, you really want to spend the first 3 months basically assessing everything that goes on internally and then making your decisions from there, as opposed to being too going too early on it. So, but also I like that they've sort of taken action on it and they've wanted to change things. I wanted to ask. Sorry.
I was going to say, yeah, I completely agree. And I actually didn't dislike Andy Coleman, but he wasn't a football man.
Right.
And I think he was a nice person. Do you know what I mean? So it makes it's harsh, not harsh, but like you feel a bit for him then when these things happen. He has still got an ownership stake in the club, so he's not left from that regard. He's just stepping down as his role as chairman. I believe it was in the summer. I don't know what date it was exactly. So it's probably happened quietly behind the scenes. So when it was announced in March, I want to say, it wasn't that long after they got rid of Luke Williams. So I mean, they took a lot of action. It was like, right, this ain't working. Bang, bang, bang. I feel like you don't want to see managers sacked or people lose their jobs, but at the same time, the decisive action was kind of it signaled that people above maybe have a bit more interest in what's going on. They took the time then appointing Sheehan, and I think that was the correct decision based on what he managed to do for the last half of the season. And they took their time replacing Coleman, and I believe I haven't got the stuff in front of me, and I haven't looked at it for a couple of weeks now. But so don't quote me on names and stuff. But I think they've brought in like they haven't necessarily directly replaced his role, but they've perhaps brought in two roles to be more like one person will look at the finances more, one person will look at the operations more, and there's a bunch of titles that are bounced around. And forgive me for forgetting, but the amount of titles of this club in those sort of positions high up, they change every year, and I don't know where they will come from. So yeah, we've had a podcast discussing now. We haven't got a clue how the structure is and what's going on there anymore. But look, if it does a better job, whatever, that's fine.
Yeah, makes sense. Alan Sheehan then, Luke. One thing that stood out to me from his playing days is that he's quite a humble guy who doesn't want to take too much credit for himself, if you like, which I really like. So I remember I was watching, I went to Luton Town's final home game in their promotion-winning season in League Two, and Alan Sheehan won a couple of awards that day. And after he'd picked up his first award, he actually went off, and then they had to call him back to take his second award. And it was almost like I think he'd kind of didn't want too much attention on him, if you like. So I suppose that speaks to somebody who's quite humble and doesn't want to stand on ceremony very much. And I'm wondering if that's what you've seen in his leadership style as a manager.
Yeah, I think he's like the first person to try to give the credit to the players and the team. You know, like he when he was caretaker, was just speaking like, you know, I'm brought in to do a job, and that's all I'm doing. You know, I'm just trying to get them to feel like they can play the way that they can, give them the confidence. You know, and he's trying to shift it all towards the players. Then when he was going well, he's not there like, oh yeah, I did this, I did that. This is why we're now doing well. So no, I completely agree. I think he's quite modest and humble. I think he's quite quiet. Like obviously got to do his media and stuff, but I think he'll just say the normal stuff. Sorry, the normal stuff. I don't think he'll be. I think Luke Williams sometimes a bit jokey, sometimes a bit
he's very
cocky in the
charismatic,
media.
isn't he, Luke?
Yeah, and Russell Martin especially. I don't think you're going to get any of that with Alan Sheehan. He'll probably just say what's in front of you, whether that's good or bad, and that's what you're going to get out of him. Which sometimes, maybe when you need to go back to basics, which perhaps is what we needed, you know, it works quite well then. And there's no games with any of the players. Like if someone's underperforming, he's going to tell them, and he's going to tell them what he wants from them to then solve that problem. So rather than any sort of like metaphors or weird quotes you see in the press that you've got to try and work out like riddles and stuff like some of the previous managers might have used. And I think that's perhaps good, because I think sometimes these days with the media and the amount of social media and everything, sometimes the managers can get caught up in trying to be too clever for the game, if you like. And yeah, he's not really into all of that, I think.
Well, they're certainly doing a fantastic job so far, so I'm really intrigued to see what he can do in his first full season as a head coach. Let's have a look at the squad then, Luke. You've got in goal, you've got Lawrence Vigouroux, who had an excellent season last year. Just talk to us about his importance for the team.
Yeah, obviously, we had Carl Rushworth the season before, who had a really good year. We perhaps thought he was going to come back on loan. Didn't quite happen, and we moved quick to get Vigouroux in, who's on free transfer from Burnley. You know, I think he went from either League One or League Two to Burnley. to be their third choice keeper when they were in the Prem, so he didn't really get a
Yeah,
look in
League
there.
Two. They'd just been promoted to League One.
Yeah. So he obviously had quality. They wouldn't have picked him up at Premier League level even for third choice if that wasn't the case. Didn't work out for him to get game time there, but I guess benefit to us that we've managed to then snap him up as someone that's been released because of the relegation. Perhaps don't need him anymore. And he's, I think, come in and shown his quality. I think sometimes his distribution wasn't always where it needed to be for like a Luke Williams style, but his shot stopping and just goalkeeping was always really, really good. I think
it's funny you say that though, Luke, if I can just interject there, because in the lower leagues at Swindon and Oldham, he was actually very much recognised as a sweeper keeper. I mean, it might be that was in his younger days, but I think
he can do it. He did it really well. But I think what I probably meant to say is, if you put a little bit of pressure on him, you can get a mistake out of him in that regard, and then maybe that knocks your confidence and a little bit of your distribution's off. He was fine. Like it was not an issue at all. But I think for me, the highlight is some of the shot stopping over the distribution. Like it's not like he can't do those things, but he's quite big in the goal. I think quite and commanding of the area. And I think compared to perhaps what we had with Rushworth, their distributions probably weren't that far apart, so it didn't stand out from what we were used to. But what stood out, considering how good Rushworth was as well, was how commanding Vigoro is. So, like, for example, corners into the box and he will just call it, catch it. And having that sort of presence is something that we haven't had for a while from a goalkeeper. So I think that's just what immediately stood out, because we've always been quite poor at conceding from set pieces and stuff historically. I think it's down to the way that we play football. We generally have perhaps a shorter team, more technical players than, Route 1, if you like. So when it comes to defending, when balls come into the box over the top, it just happened to be, even from Premier League days under Brendan Rodgers, Michael Laudrup, it's just something that's always been there. And having a keeper like that who can just come in, who's quite tall as well, that helps, and just pick the ball out of the air. Having that ability is just something that's been valuable. So his shot stopping and goalkeeping in general has been really good. There's been a couple of errors where, like I said, a bit of pressure, he's got the ball at his feet and he makes the wrong decision, or like passes it straight out or to someone under pressure. That has happened. But it's distribution when he's not under pressure is completely fine. It's not a problem. But Alan Sheehan probably doesn't want him to take as many risks. So that's probably better for him anyway in the long run. So really happy with what he's brought to the team. And again, to get him on a free transfer, like that's really, really good business for Swansea. I don't know whether he's a player that will get looked at by another club to move on. I don't know how many eyeballs have been on him. I personally think he was probably one of the better goalkeepers in the league, but I think any fan from any team's probably going to say that about their goalkeeper. So I'm quite happy if he's not really making the headlines in the way that other teams get attracted to him, because I do think he can do a job probably at a higher level if he was called upon. But I guess it's competitive in goals, isn't it? Because there's only really one that plays per club.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose you've got another goalkeeper in Andy Fisher, who's must be, I imagine, into his mid-20s now, and probably at a stage of his career where he would like to be a number one somewhere. Do you see him possibly getting offers elsewhere to maybe drop down to League One or League Two?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Fisher leaves. He was on loan last season. I'm not really sure what the future holds for him in Swansea. It depends if, like you said, if he's got more ambitions to be playing more regular, he's going to have to move on. But if he's okay being on the bench for the season and hoping that Vigoro picks up an injury or something, then maybe he'll stay. But again, that's Alan Sheehan's decision to make now, whereas it wasn't his decision last summer. So it'll be interesting to see. I can't see him starting ahead of Vigoro. I would expect perhaps another loan or a transfer. I feel like another loan is more likely. I just got a feeling he's one of those players that came in, didn't quite work out, and now he'll just keep going on loan until he gets released on a free when his contract expires, which is frustrating because that's obviously, ends up being a bit of a waste. But it is what it is. We've got too many examples of that, unfortunately.
Yeah,
So.
I feel like the club needs to sort of because it does create just that sense of malaise around the club. You want to feel like the players' contract to the club are players that there's a clear plan for. And sometimes, okay, there are going to be players where you're not able to offload their wages, and so you've got to do what you've got to do. But this thing of having players that you keep for a long time, I think QPR had a few examples of that in the past, and it's. I don't know. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I think you want to try and offload players.
Yeah, I don't think it's intentional. I think they just made mistakes when it comes to, first of all, the transfer. I don't know whether they perhaps overpay. Like he was Russell Martin's man for goal. Like he brought him in from. I'm sure he was from MK Dons.
MK Dons, yeah.
Yeah, so like he was his keeper when he was there, and he was just meant to be the person that fit his system, and it just didn't work out. And even Russell Martin dropped him, and obviously got Rushworth in the end. Oh, was it Rushworth that got it? Yeah, can't remember now. He dropped him anyway, whoever it was for, in the end. And ultimately, he's just been knocking about the club, not playing either on the bench or gone on loan. He did have an injury for a while, but I don't know what wage packet he's on, because perhaps the team's interested in him will be lower than championship level, so perhaps they can't compete with his wage packet. He doesn't want to drop his wage, and then that's how you end up in these situations. So again, like I said, we've had too many examples of that, and I think part of the problem is the ever rotating manager situation that we've had over the last couple of years, who all come in with their own ideas in the end, and some players just don't fit those new ideas, and then you're just left with them. And can you actually get rid? So like Christian Pedersen, another example, who finally has been released this summer. But I think 4 appearances since he came in, and quite a hefty wage packet as well. So not the best bit of business that we've done. But again, couldn't offload him because of that wage packet. Overpaid him. I don't think necessarily we overpaid for him, but maybe that's where the wages were higher because of that. And he was quite happy not playing, just knocking about the club and picking that wage packet up towards the tail end of his career. So yeah, a few costly mistakes, unfortunately, over the last couple of years.
Yeah, club needs to improve on the recruitment, but they've signed Ethan Galbraith from Leyton Orient, one of the best midfielders in League One last season, who also played second half the right back. I'm wondering, is Ethan Galbraith going to be the Matt Grimes replacement, or is he going to be an option at right back? How do you see that one playing out?
I would say he's going to go into midfield. I don't think he will. I think Josh Key is going to continue to be the first choice right back. So I can't see the value in signing him to be understudy there. And I don't feel like we'd pushed Key to be on the bench either. It doesn't really make sense. It's good to have cover, because I don't think we've really got cover at right back. So if Key's injured, he can go and slot in there.
You've got Sam Parker who can play there, I suppose.
Yeah. We have got youth that can come up and play in those areas, but I don't know whether we've invested enough time in them. Say Josh Key got injured on day one, for example. I'm not saying Sam Parker wouldn't do a good job, but he's more primarily come on as a sub more further up the pitch. And that's one of the frustrations I had from last season, was I didn't think we put enough time into some of the youth that we do have. So we are a little bit short in the wing back areas on both sides, really. I mean, yeah, we've got options. I think Alyssa can maybe play that as well, but again, lack of experience. So it's good that we've got somebody else that can slot in if it's needed. I would imagine it's not the first choice option. It's just if it's ever necessary, because I think midfield is probably a little bit easier to deal with, a bit of rotation. As much as I still think we perhaps need another player in there, I would expect Galbraith, to start probably the majority of games from day one, I would assume, at the moment of time. But like, we haven't seen any preseason yet, so don't know what tactics formation are ahead of us. So it's I would imagine it's not going to change too much, but yeah, I think he'll slot straight back into the midfield. Obviously, Lewis O'Brien filled the shoes of Matt Grimes in a different way when he came in January. So I think, he's gone. Galbraith will go into that slot now.
Yeah, for sure. You've kind of alluded to it there in the right back spot, that Josh Key has definitely put himself up there as one of the first names on the team sheet. Do you think it's helped him having, because this was his second season at championship level, do you think he's benefited from that first year to acclimatise to the level?
Yeah, look, he's a player that's definitely getting better all the time, but he is sometimes still error prone. But you kind of get like, really good moments from him, but then there's always a clanger. I would say at the moment he's dropping at least one clanger a match. And when I say a clanger, it's like bad decision making, really. So a bad pass when you're in your defensive third that ends up getting intercepted, or he tries to run it out to the defensive third and runs into trouble, stuff like that. And he does it at least once a match, and that's the issue. If he can cut that out, you'll really move on in his game, because his attacking threat is really good. He moves into the midfield really well and supports the midfield. That's one of his strengths. And I'm not saying there's a comparison here, but Luke Williams was shouting in the media comparing him to Gareth Bale at some point last season. Not because they're necessarily the levels, Josh Key is not Gareth Bale, but I think in terms of what he does and able to like stride up the pitch with the ball when he's got a bit of space ahead of him and work from the midfield areas, alternatively with the wide areas. That's what he was kind of getting at. And I think he went and scored a worldie, didn't he, in one game against, I can't remember who it was against. I was at the game. It was a very good goal. He just hit it from outside the box and it just nestled in the top corner. So he's got good ability in him.
Do you think? I'd love to expand on that, Luke, because I'm just wondering. You've got a right winger in Ronald, who's a very direct, quick player who loves to hug the touchline. So actually, could we see a lot of underlapping runs from Josh Key, where Ronald occupies opposing wide defenders by hugging the touchline, and it can create Key to make those inverted runs?
Yeah, so that's what they do when it works well. That's what they do. So Ronald will be a bit wider, and he works better when he's not double marked and when he's got one-on-ones or a bit of space to work with. So Josh Key, to give him that space, comes into the midfield, and it gives an option for Ronald to cut back with a pass. Or sometimes Key will push on through the lines and Ronald can play it on to him. So that's when those two, are gelling at their best. That's the sort of things they see. And quite interestingly, on the opposite side with Timon and when he plays, is more the inside winger or the inside forward, and Timon will hug the touchline. So you get the opposite effect from the other side of the pitch with the wide players, because can play in the middle as well as a cam, and he likes to cut in and try and like have a shot from the edge of the box. So he's doing those sort of things more, whereas Ronald's staying wide. But then the wing back on each side will do the opposite thing in support of that. So it is a good system. I just think perhaps needs a bit of refining and work and stuff to be implemented more consistently at a good level to be creating more chances. But yeah, like Josh Key is, I think this is his third season, so I'll be hoping he can cut those errors out, and then he'll be a solid, one of the top right backs in the league, I think, if he can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about central defence then. You've obviously lost Harry Darling, but you've added, firstly, a bit of left-footed balance and also a bit more aerial prowess and physicality to the defence in signing Cameron Burgess from Ipswich Town. And so with him alongside Ben Cabango, I imagine you'll be pretty good at defending your own penalty area. That's in theory, at least.
Yeah, in theory. I mean, obviously it was disappointing, the situation with Harry Darling, and there's a lot of errors that happened along the way with that one. But it is what it is. At the end of the day, he's decided to move on. But I think they announced Burgess the day before they announced Darling had decided to move on, which we all knew was coming, but in terms of the official announcement. And I think it really softened the blow, like, significantly. I think people were all of a sudden a lot less concerned or bothered by that. In some aspects, you could argue it's an upgrade. I think the only caveat is the age of both of them in terms of where they are in their careers. You've got the one that's more seasoned, more developed, more experienced, instead of the one that's getting still to that level and has got the more sell-on value. So, it's fine. He's going to come in and be first team anyway, so perhaps he's not there for the reasons of reselling. He's there to be a bit of experience and stability at the back, considering we lost a lot of experience in the summer with Joe Allen and Kyle Norton leaving. So, that's a really good addition to the team with Burgess, I think. And if you can look online, and I think a lot of fan accounts across the Championship have been quite impressed with that signing. Ipswich, by all accounts, wanted to keep him, so they were a bit gutted, the fan base there, that he's not stayed. stayed at Ipswich. So I'd like to think that's a really good signal of intent for where we go in ahead of the season. And then Ricardo Santos has come in, obviously, on a free from League One from Bolton. I don't know an awful lot about him. I just know he's been decent for them over a number of years. Perhaps a couple of seasons ago was pushing for a move up, and had some injury issues. So I guess
it's
if you can get
interesting
back to that
actually.
level.
Yeah, so his stock would probably have been higher 2 years ago than it was now, because the last couple of seasons have been interrupted by injuries, but he is also a real physical unit as well. So again, probably add to that collection of centre halves who are going to be very physical and good at heading balls away and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I wouldn't necessarily have Santos as a starting first team player.
No, I think he'd be on the bench, and he'd probably be fully aware of that. He's quite late in his career anyway, isn't he? So he's probably not going to turn down and move to the Championship, because if I'm right, he hasn't played at this level before. So it'll be interesting. Maybe it'll suit him better. We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's look at central midfield. We obviously mentioned the Galbraith signing earlier, and I think one thing that I've really been struck by with Galbraith is when I watched him a couple of years ago, I felt like he was a very dynamic midfielder in that he was able to do a bit of everything, and he was very sharp with his passing. But then I've watched him in the season just gone, and he seems to have added much more of a class and more of a playmaking feel to his game. He beautiful the way that he glides with the ball. So he's kind of basically added some of those raw minerals in terms of that dynamism that he has with a bit more, and he's kind of refined it with some of those extra touches where he glides with the ball and some of his passing. So I'm really excited to see how Galbraith can fit into an Alan Sheehan team in midfield, as we touched on earlier.
Yeah, I'm quite excited to see how he fits in as well. No one really quite knows how they're going to line up. I think obviously we've got Vidal coming in too, who's attacking. So it's like, who's actually going to be the one that maybe drops a bit deeper with Franco, which I think on the balance, we're looking a bit more positive than defensive with the options that we have at the moment. So whether there's someone still to come in to add to that balance, or that's just the way we're going to deploy the midfield, which if that is the way, that's quite exciting to see. But maybe not what I would expect from an Alan Sheehan team. So yeah, we'll have to wait and see. I'm as curious as you to see what's on the table from the options, and it's completely different from what we are used to. We've had Grimes for the last however long, and we know exactly what to expect out of that. And yeah, we had Lewis O'Brien, who came in at time of need, and he offered something completely different to Grimes in a really good way. He was quite balanced, I think, in the middle. Now it's a kind of a new era in front of us that none of us really know what to expect, to be honest. And I think it's hard for Swans fans to sort of look at the midfield and be like, yeah, this is what we're going to be doing now. So if you ask me that question in a couple of weeks, maybe I can give you a better answer, but I really, really not sure I'm going to say it's going to be Galbraith and Franco and then Vidal ahead of them. But I'm fully aware that Vidal and Galbraith could be the other way around. So maybe it will depend on the game, or maybe there'll be a 3 and not necessarily an attacking option. They'll rotate on the pitch.
Yeah, I think I would be looking to maximise Galbraith and get him on the ball a lot. I think the downside of having a double pivot and playing Galbraith in the 10 is that you risk him maybe being a little bit on the periphery in games.
Yeah.
Whereas I think you'd want him on the ball as much as possible. And I'd almost be inclined to give him a free rein, where if you've got somebody like Franco, who is going to sit and break up play, then I think Galbraith is somebody who can roam and drop deep and collect the ball, but then spin away and go and create.
Well, that sounds like he will be a direct replacement for Grimes then, in his own way. And I know we were linked. We were in for him in January, so it does make sense. They obviously didn't want to rush the fee that they were demanding back then. So yeah, I think it'll be a nice new era. I think it'll be a fresh look at that midfield. And as much as I loved Matt Grimes and I thought he did a really good job for us, maybe that's what we need to push on now, to try and move forward. I think Jay Felton is the only player in that midfield that's kind of historic in a way of kind of being with us since we got relegated. So there's a lot of change over the last few years, a lot of fresh faces. And yeah, the Swansea of now is not even nowhere near similar to the Swansea of 2 years ago. At this point, I think there's not that many players that are making the starting team. So it's interesting to see where we're going with this. And I guess in one degree, it kind of has to work because they have kind of gone all out a little bit this summer with some of these signings. So yeah, but I think Galbraith is going to be a good signing. I'm really excited to see him get on the ball.
Swansea City and Jay Fulton coming towards the end of the road. Is he limited in how much he can really contribute for Swansea City to try and get to that next level?
I mean, he's getting on with his age. He's definitely not a player that is starting, and he's definitely not a player that most of the fans wants to see starting. He did have a bit of a new lease of life under Alan Sheehan, though. As much as he wasn't starting that many games, the system and what Alan Sheehan wanted definitely suits what Fulton offers a lot more. So whereas he's come in, there's a lot of criticism and stick the last few years under Russell Martin and Luke Williams from the fan base for what he does. A lot of those fans acknowledged that he was playing a lot better under Alan Sheehan. I'm not saying that I don't think he's got that long left, if I'm being honest. There's probably a potential this summer he could move on. I believe this is his last year in contract, so whether he gets a new one or not, I'm not sure if he does stay. I think the issue at the moment is I don't know if we've got enough cover in the middle to let him go right now. If we bring someone else in, then maybe we'll see him move on. I know Plymouth were interested, apparently. I don't know how much truth is in that link. But I don't think we'll see him go unless somebody comes through the door. Because, especially like I said, we lost Joe Allen, we lost Lewis O'Brien, and the only addition at the moment is, well, there's two really. There's Galbraith and Whittle, but it depends where you consider Whittle. I always got the impression he was brought in for more attacking. So then he wouldn't really be replacing a job that Fulton's doing. And he's probably the one that's the most defensive out of all of the options we have now. So maybe when you want to close down a game, he's probably got something to offer coming off the bench. And if he's not there, I'm not really sure who else is doing that job. So I do think he's still got value. And again, experience. We've got to be careful that we don't let all of our experience go, because if Fulton moves on, you've got obviously Burgess, who's new to the club, but probably one of the most experienced outfield players. But other than that, it's Ben Cabango, who, again, he's not that seasoned. He's been around for a while, but he's still young himself. So you've got. I think it needs to be a bit of caution there with just happily shipping these older players on. And I know there might be a couple of others that are older in the squad, but in terms of experience at this level in the English system as well. Fulton's been with us since, I want to say, 2013, 2014. So, he's quite long serving in the club. It would be a shame to see him go when he does leave, but I know sometimes you've got to move on. I just want to hope that if he does go, we've got a ready replacement in there, which, we've already made a few signings. So whether that's an important thing to do this summer, I'm not sure. Considering Fulton's here, he's got a year left. Do I think we're going to get a fee for him? Probably not. So if he goes on a free next year, it's probably not the end of the world. And then maybe we can look at investing in a replacement then.
Yeah, or the thing to do could be to sign a young lad on a long-term contract and then loan them out to League One, so that when Fulton goes next summer, you've got somebody to bring in.
Yeah, something like that might be okay as well.
Sure. Talk to me about the attacking positions, because we've already touched on Ronald and the athleticism that he brings. He's somebody who I would have said actually would again benefit from this more direct sort of getting behind style that we're seeing under Alan Sheehan.
Yeah, look, Ronald is an interesting one. He flatters to deceive a lot, but he can also provide, and he's just frustrating sometimes. Like, he's got so much in his locker, but I think he's such a confidence player that he needs to beat a man within the first 5 minutes for you to get the best out of him. And if he doesn't, then you get the worst out of him. And then he'll run at people and just run at them, literally lose the ball. Whereas if he beats that man the first time, then he'll beat them all the time. Yeah. And the other thing he needs to work on is his end product. So he can't shoot for the life of him. And his crossing, maybe 1 in 6 is a good one. So I'm hoping that we'll see a little bit more from him, because I think he was a top assister still last season, having said all of that. But at the same time, he kind of plays every match and rarely gets subbed. So maybe the stats are skewed if you look at the per minute performance. But he's also someone that can get bums off seats.
Mm.
So it's one of those ones where like you want to see him on a pitch, but he just frustrates you a lot sometimes.
It's interesting. It surprises me though that he's the guy that's been bombarded with 90 minutes, because I could also imagine a world where you bring him off the bench for half an hour, and he's the kind of person who could light up a game in maybe those more open stretched games.
I think,
or maybe you bring him in fresh when he's not played, and then he's got that something different to offer, as opposed to bombarding him with loads of stats.
Yeah, I think he's like considered, quite highly within the hierarchy and what he offers. And obviously they've got all the stats and stuff. I'm sure that he's performing with all the metrics that they're thereafter, and chance creation and stuff. We perhaps see it a bit different sometimes from the fan perspective, but I also think maybe part of that is the options that we had available to replace him last year. They just weren't considered. Like, is there any point starting them? Was generally starting on the left, especially after Pete Harris got injured. I think before Pete Harris got injured, there was a few times Ronald would get dropped, but after that, I don't really think there was a time where that happened, because Giannelli just wasn't able to get back up to full speed since coming back from his injury, and Bianchini didn't start a game when Alan Sheehan took over. So I mean, there's no one else really there other than youth. You got Sam Parker, but again, I already mentioned, I don't think the youth perhaps had enough of a look in last season. And Ji Sung was starting the other side of the pitch. So this season, we've obviously brought in, and I'm probably going to say his name wrong, Zidane Inusa, which they've paid quite a hefty fee for, by all accounts, undisclosed, of course, but by all accounts is significant if you add in all the add-ons. So I feel like they're expecting a bit from him. And maybe that helps with the competition in the wide areas, so that it's not a case of Ronald's going to start every game. I think he prefers the left, but can play kind of in all three, across the front three. And obviously Vidal's come in as well, who I think is more primarily central. But again, I'm not sure who's got the opportunity to go out wide if that's necessary, or if the formation changes to accommodate, maybe they want to try something different in that area. I'm not sure. So there's a little bit more competition there this season for sure. And I'd like to hope, I hope that if Ronald doesn't feel like he's going to start every game, that will help him with his performances. But again, time will tell. I like him as a player, and he's had some really good moments, but there's definitely areas for him to work on. And if he can nail those areas, he could be a really good force in the Championship. Like the first few games when we signed him, we thought we'd signed an absolute gem out of nowhere. Raw talent, raw pace, running at people, getting past them, just causing havoc. But I did defend him a little bit. I do, to some degree. I'm wondering if it got coached out of him and out of our wingers in general in Luke Williams' system.
Right, yeah.
Because I think the way Luke Williams was trying to implement the game was get them in the wide areas, but they didn't want so many risks taken when it came to the chances. So they would then stop and kind of work the ball back into the box slowly, go pass it back, and maybe then they were more, if they found it more difficult to sort of stretch their legs against opposition players and the confidence wasn't there to take them on. I think because of the way we were playing, the defense was always, there was a lot more defenders for them to work with because we had the ball in the other half and we were keeping the ball. So the space isn't there. And Ronald's a player who needs space. So I do think to an extent that sort of tactical style is not something that suits him. He's probably a player that much more delivers when it comes to maybe a counter-attacking style, a bit of pace to exploit the space ahead of you, rather than some trickery with your feet to get past like the two defenders that are marking you in the corner, which is kind of what he was up against a lot of the time when we were playing that way. So I do think maybe we'll see more out of him with Alan Sheehan, because it's not that we've ditched the Swansea way entirely, but we're definitely going to have the ball less than we would under Luke Williams. And I think on the transition is something that we're trying to be a little bit more clinical. So hopefully we can see more from him.
Yeah, absolutely. I think hopefully that style should translate nicely for Ronald. Looking at the number 10 spot, do you know what, Luke? I've seen a lot of potential in Ollie Cooper when he first came into the team off the back of a good loan at Newport one of the seasons. But it feels like it's a name that's just been there for a number of years now, and he's just not quite found the level of progress that maybe some people would have liked. big season ahead for Ollie Cooper?
I feel like I've said this for the last 2 or 3 years now, and I really like Ollie Cooper as well. But when he first came in under Russell Martin, he was really good. He didn't get selected for the Wales World Cup squad, and that seemed to really dent his confidence. He did, though. He managed to get back into the team last season under Luke Williams. He was starting as number 10. That's considering the year before, he really struggled to get back into the team at the tail end of that. But he was there at number 10 last season, starting, and he was playing actually quite well. But he got an injury that he was out for quite a few months. And again, he came back from that injury and struggled to really make any impact again back into the team. So I don't know. It's difficult. He's been linked with moves away. I don't know how much value is in those links. I wouldn't like to see him move on. He's good. He's definitely a good squad player. Like I'd like to see him hold his hand up and push to be like starter all the time, being one of, come from our academy and stuff. And also the beginning of last season, he got himself into the Welsh squad, and Bellamy was deploying him as a centre midfielder, and he actually performed really well in that role for Wales. So I'm wondering if there's value in him dropping back into that sort of area. And he might not start ahead of the other guys, but I just spoke about Fulton and where he is in the team. Maybe with an Ollie Cooper coming in as a centre midfielder option now, that takes pressure off. I do think Vidal is going to be the person that starts as number 10. And then you've got to think about Liam Cullen, who did a lot of last season there as well. So the competition is there for that 10 role. You've got Amji Sung, who's an option, with obviously Anusa coming in if they want to get all three of those on the pitch. So it's going to be difficult for Ollie Cooper. Like, this is the season that's perhaps going to make or break him in a Swansea shirt. I think if he can't manage to overcome those things and get in the team regularly enough, then I do think maybe the time will come where he does move on at some point over the next year. But I hope that he can show that he's got value still to add to the team.
The big skill that I've always associated with Ollie Cooper is his ability to spin an opponent.
Yeah.
And maybe I've attributed that to something you could use the number 10, but actually it could be quite handy if you've got to beat an opposition press to have somebody like Ollie Cooper in that number 8 role where you play it into him and he can spin them and then the game can open up for you. So rather than use it in the number 10 role where that might be harder, you could maybe use it in a deeper area. So I could see that.
I think so. I mean, I think Craig Bellamy seems to see the value there, so maybe that's something that the future holds for Ollie Cooper, but we'll have to wait and see. I don't know. I don't really think... I think once or twice he's played there for Swansea, but generally speaking, he's been deployed more further up, and also on the wings. He's played on the wings, but he's just less effective out wide, to be honest.
Yeah, I could imagine. So Liam Cullen then, Luke, do you feel like he would deserve to keep his place in Swansea's best 11 for next season?
I don't really know. I feel harsh saying it, but I don't think he's... if we want to hit the next level, we probably need a striker that's going to be more clinical than Liam Cullen. But I do think he works better as part of a 2 up top, which I think is why he maybe had a better time when he dropped to number 10, because he was more of a shadow striker then. And he comes in late and he's got that more space to work with. I don't think he really does as well when he's leading the line. Maybe he's not as physical as what you need sometimes, or at least in the way that we're playing now. I think Verpotnik is more built for that role.
Right.
But then we didn't see an awful lot of consistency from him last season either. I think he's better towards the end. Not sure how his fitness was for the year, because he didn't seem to be able to get a string of games together. I'm not sure. I'm not sure which one's going to start leading the line. But Liam Cullen finished our top goal scorer, so I'm not writing him off entirely. But I'm not really sure what his position is. His best position is. That's the problem. I just don't know. It's kind of like Jerry Yates. I don't know how he didn't operate at his best when he was on his own up front. I feel like both him and Cullen, they work good because they got a lot of energy. They got a lot of good pressing about them. It's good. Like, say they started a 2 up top with the Verpotnik. Verpotnik can be the target man, win the knockdowns, make a bit of a presence for himself, and then the Cullen, the Yates running off that would be really good. And when we're out with the ball, they're full of energy to close the opposition down. So it'll be interesting to see where they go. There's links that they're going to bring in another forward. Ollie McBurney's been one of those links that's not gone away all summer. I don't know whether that will come off. I think wages might be a stumbling block, but it just doesn't seem to be going away. I know there's other teams interested there as well. But I just mean the interest is there in a forward coming in. So they're clearly looking at that area to strengthen it, in which case I'm not sure how you fit all three of them into the team if we do bring another forward in. I'd imagine Jerry Yates is someone they look to offload. But then Cullen for Potnick and any new striker coming in for a one-striker team. This, and Bobby Wales also got brought in, which I know he's probably more for the youth team. But it just knocks him even further back in the pecking order, even if he's one for the future. So,
for sure. I think from what you said there, maybe the number 10 role might not be used so much for creativity as that second striker role that you described in terms of crashing the box and feeding off the knockdowns from possibly the Potnick, because if you've got Galbraith in mid as one of the two central midfielders, and you've got Yom Ji-sung possibly cutting inside from the left, that's quite a lot of creativity already. And maybe you'd add Josh Key to the mix in that sort of inverted underlapping right back role. So maybe you have the Potnick occupying centre halves with his physicality. You have Cullen or possibly Yates kind of feeding off that as like a second striker. You have Ronald holding the width. You have Yom Ji-sung cutting inside with to link up with Galbraith. Maybe Timon providing the width on the other side, and the number 10 role is a bit more of a goal scorer than a creator.
Yeah, it could be the case. I think when Sheehan came in, he was in number 10 less than he was when he was Luke Williams, but that's not to say that it won't go back to that. So he had his purple patch. I want to say January, December, maybe, when he came back from Wales duty, did a really good performance for Wales, and then he came back and scored like a bunch of goals over the next month, and then it kind of fizzled out towards the end of the season for Cullen. But yeah, we'll see. I again, it's quite hard to tell before we see some of these preseason games what the intentions are going to be for Sheehan. I'm really struggling to see where he's going to play some of these players, but I think maybe you could be on to something with that one, or maybe it gives a bit more flexibility, even if it's not what happens every game.
Joel Cottrell had some nice moments on loan at Swindon last season. Do you think that a League One loan is next on the agenda for him?
Yeah, probably. I do think that Sheehan did speak about all these loans that we had last season and say they will have the chance pre-season to show if they're ready to make the step up to our squad. So again, reverting back to the Fulton situation, maybe there's the opportunity there to come in as a fourth choice midfielder or something and show that he can add value to ours. And if not, if Fulton stays and we don't think that he's going to get enough playing time, I definitely would see him go in again for a higher level loan. I think that's definitely on the cards, same as Cameron Congreve, really. I think those two really showed some signs of good development when they were out last year. Congreve's been around the team a little bit before and struggled when he's come on under Russell Martin. So I think it was nice to see him go somewhere a bit more earlier for his development, because he's still really, really quite young. And I think that's really redeveloped his confidence. So yeah, it's good to see them both doing well. Maybe they're the two that will break through next, I think.
Yeah, Congreve did well at Bromley in the second half of last season as well. Just wanted to touch on Zidane Inusa, because he's somebody the club committed a 5-year contract to, which on the other one hand is really exciting because they clearly feel that this could be an 8-figure asset in the long run, but also urging a little bit of caution because you don't want another situation where it's another player that's on 5 years and you can't, if it doesn't work out, you end up with series of loans. But I'm wondering what your early intel is on Zidane Inusa.
He looks quite exciting, to be honest, on the ball. I haven't got a bunch of early intel on him, only from what I've seen highlight packages from when he was out in Sweden, I believe it was. Quite excited to see what he can bring to the table at this level. He looks quick, a lot of pace about him, a lot of skill on the ball, and he will take players on and cause a bit of carnage, really. And that's what I think I want to see from him. And to give Ronald a little bit of a kick up the backside if you want to do the same thing. But the fee, a bit high, I was perhaps surprised to see. And the length of contract, I keep flip-flopping on what you want. I think, they did long ones before and got left with a bunch of players that they couldn't offload. So then they went shorter ones, and then you end up in the Harry Darling situation. So, I guess they've got the trust in their new data analysts and the approach they're taking for the transfers they're making, and they're committing to him being someone that's going to work. And if that is the case, then if 2 years' time he's performed really well and he's got 3 years left in his deal, he's going to be an asset. So that's the idea, isn't it? I guess hopefully it works out.
Yeah, hopefully it pans out that way. So Zam Vipotnik then, Luke, do you think it's a big second season for him after what we'd call an underwhelming first campaign?
Yeah, I'm not sure how fully fit he was all of the campaign last year. Obviously, he was in the Euro squad as well for Slovakia, so he didn't really have a summer break. Transition of managers through the season as well. I think Luke Williams was rotating that striker slot quite regular. Like even Bianchini was getting a run out up there. So I think you probably would have expected to play a bit more than what he did. But he's shown really quality when he's been on the pitch on occasions. And, he's got a good finish behind him. He can be quite clinical when he gets the opportunity. So I do feel like if he had been a player that started week in, week out, he probably would have doubled his goal tally from what he did get in the end. Which, if that had happened, then that's probably quite a good return. So it depends where he's going to go with the striker situation, who he's going to trust. I do think there's a little bit more value to having someone you trust more regular. Just hopefully he can reward that trust and give the performances back. But he holds the ball up well and he can play others in. And sometimes that's a good trait to have for the way that we're trying to play now.
So if he can keep doing that, but also add a few more goals to his game, then that would certainly help for Zam Vipotnik. So in terms of remaining additions then, Luke, obviously Swansea aren't flush with cash as far as I know. So I'm wondering, looking at the squad now, I think you probably need an understudy to Josh Tymon, possibly one more young centre-half, although you have got 3 experienced options there, possibly one more midfielder. And you know what? Maybe I don't know. Possibly, depending, you think Sam Parker's can be another option at right back. I'm thinking another 3 or 4 additions between now and the end of the window. What do you think?
No, I agree. Whether we're going to get them in or not is another question. We're quite often left in situations where 1 or 2 of those positions you mentioned, we just got to deal with what we got when it comes to cover. And sometimes you get away with it, and then other times you get an injury and you don't get away with it. But we quite often leave ourselves in that situation, unfortunately. I like to think they won't, but the money they've spent already, every time they announce the next one, I'm like, oh God, I wasn't expecting more. Like Galbraith, for example. Maybe they'll utilise the loan market a bit now. I think there's been a lot of criticism in recent years for overusing that, and we don't buy players that we can then, that are ours. We left every summer with a big gap everywhere. I think the last 2 summers we've done a good job of doing that. I think we've given ourselves that luxury that if we do have a few gaps in the squad, the loan market can definitely be used, especially if they're not necessarily players that are going to come in where we want them to be starters all the time. Then we're probably not going to get the quality to replace the players we've already got in those positions. So I think that could be a good option to try and fill the holes you just mentioned. But I do agree with all those positions you just stated, where we need a bit more cover.
Expectations then, Luke. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of optimism on the basis of the form. And how football works is that your form in the last third of the campaign under a new manager always translates into a full season.
Of course.
Yeah. So how are you feeling in terms of, you're going to be up against it? I imagine it's going to be a bottom 8 budget in the Championship versus some of the hope, I suppose, from the last third of last season. And how does that sort of level out in terms of expectation for you?
You're right with the budget, but I do think that they have done some of the best business that I've seen so far. I'm quite excited for the players that have come in. I think they've been really sensible. They've done it early. And like I said earlier, the positive atmosphere is a lot better than it's been for a long time. And coming off the back of the momentum of our results and our form, I'm hoping that's within the squad as well. So a lot to look forward to. I said the same thing last season. Look, I just want more consistency for the season. And at the minimum, we finished 11th, was it last year? So I feel like that needs to be the minimum, but to get in there in a more stable way rather than a late push at the end of the season will be nice to show that consistency, to build the bridges for them, even if it's for the next season. And if 11th the minimum, I think maybe then whatever can be ahead of that will be a bonus. But I look at like this season just gone and the one before, and bar like this season just gone, January, where it fell apart into Luke Williams. If you delete that out of our season, and then through that period give us the average points per game we had for the remainder of the season, so just take January out and add in a points per game for the rest of the season without January, and we would have been a playoff contender. So it just shows the fine margins, and I just think a little bit more consistency, if it clicks a little bit more and they're able to do that throughout the full season, that we could be somewhere on the outskirts of that. I don't know if we'll have enough to get in and have enough to definitely win it, but even to be in that conversation, we were nearly in that conversation going into the end of this season, so which was unexpected. So, that's only a couple of results away, really. So, that's what I think we are. But we'll see, because you never know in the Championship.
Absolutely. So as you know, Luke, I'm doing my 1 to 24s this month, and one of my processes for that this year is to rate each team on 14 different categories that I think are going to determine their fate. So what I'm going to do is I'll shout a category at you, and you can give me a number between 1 and 10.
Okay.
First category is ownership.
I'll say 6 at the moment.
6 for now. Okay.
For now, it's a bit like can't really give a good indication yet. So
okay. Infrastructure.
7.
7 for infrastructure. Nice. Playing budget.
3.
3 for playing budget. Fair. Management. I mean, 10 on the first 3 months.
I mean, yeah, I'll go 7, because he's obviously, can't judge of a caretaker role. We'll have to see. And
of course, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Goalkeeping unit.
7 as well, probably. I think
7 for Lawrence Figueroa. Okay. Defense.
8.
8 for the defense. Nice. Midfield.
I'll go 7 again, because there's a lot of unknown in there. So it's on paper they're good, but we haven't seen them play together yet.
Of course. Attack.
I'm going to go 6, because I think striker position, they got a lot to prove.
Squad depth for this stage of the window.
Probably 5. There's some key positions that we'd be struggling with if there was injuries. In terms of depth, like for example, if Keogh Timon got injured, there's not. I don't know who steps in.
I agree, although I also think that they are those key positions, but it's not you only need another 3 or 4 players rather.
Yeah, okay, maybe I'm being harsh. I'll go 6. Sorry, I'll go 6. Yeah.
Okay. Squad stability.
7.
7 for squad stability, a bit of continuity there. Next one is growth potential. So this is players you think can be a lot better this season versus last season. Typically young players are on their way up.
I think 8. I think a lot of our team could probably improve from last season.
Great. Team spirit.
8 again. I think they work really well together.
Nice. Fitness.
8. I think under Alan Sheehan especially, it looked a lot fitter than perhaps before. But I don't know why that is. But they've been talking about in pre-season improving the fitness. So
nice. And finally, quality.
7. I'm torn in some places. So yeah, we'll see. After a lot of them are new and it's hard. It's hard to judge at the moment.
Of course, yeah. All right, brilliant. So some final quick-fire questions from me then, Luke, before we wrap up. Biggest reason to believe in Swansea City right now?
Alan Sheehan.
I knew you were going to say that. Yes. Biggest reason for doubt?
A lot of new players.
And maybe too early for a prediction, but give me a rough feel for where you think next season might be heading for Swansea City.
I think mid to top half.
Mid to top half.
Yeah.
There you go. Brilliant stuff. Well, Luke, thanks so much for joining us from SwansCast. Thanks everyone for watching at home. You can subscribe to SwansCast, of course, and you can subscribe to EFL Debate on YouTube and on Spotify. That would really help us out. And we'll see you again for another Summer Deep Dive very soon.
Thank you.